touch, smell, and taste. And the interaction between these senses depend on dominating sensory impressions, and they can vary from time to time.
And here at the Medieteknik we have a lot of courses that where we try to represent the reality as good as we can. And in order to create an authentic representation, we need an exact perceptual match. And our next lecturer is going to talk about something called virtuality, where we try to stimulate all the senses at the same time to create a real-life experience. Let me present Chalmers.
Hi, good afternoon everyone. Thank you very much for having me. It's very great to be at this is such an exciting event, and a lot of interest and a lot of enthusiasm. That's really important. First I should say, people say I talk very quickly. The secret is to listen faster. I'll try to speak slowly, but when I get going, I do tend to get going. Okay, so I'm going to talk about a project that we're doing at the University of Warwick, the Digital Lab. It's called Real Virtuality, and as we'll see, that's obviously a deliberate play on the words virtual reality. And the key thing for us is that it's not only going to be high fidelity, i.e. physics-based, but also going to be multi-sensory. And that's key, because we as human beings monitor the world with all our senses all the time, and we're not just about visuals. And that tends to be the only one that most people consider. Just briefly who we are, there's quite a big group of mine. I was at the University of Bristol for 18 years, and we moved to Warwick, which is about there, and you're about here, so reasonably close. And I have quite a large group who are now just finishing off, most of them. We do a large number of projects, AR imaging, serious games, all sorts of things, virtual archaeology, and these obviously tie into what we plan to do. So, okay, I can't see a damn thing because of these lights, but how many of you think this is real? Put up your hand if you think that's real. Okay, how many think it's computer graphics? Okay, you need to get your ass chested. That's not real at all, that's a photograph, actually taken in Medieteknikdagarna in South Africa. And the photograph is a representation of reality, but it's not real at all. Again, I can't see a damn thing. How many of you been to Medieteknikdagarna in South Africa? Okay, you need to get out more, right? But if you stand there, it's wonderful. We did some work on some rock art carvings up there. Absolutely glorious, wonderful, crisp spring morning. And, you know, yes, the photograph captures something about it, but it's a long way from if you were there. And that's important. So, again, how many think that's the photograph or computer graphics? Photograph? Okay. Computer graphics? You sure? Okay. Yeah, so this is the photograph. This is the corridor when I was at Bristol University. Photograph, computer graphics? Okay, computer graphics a little hard. And that one? Okay, so it's becoming a little harder as a photograph as computer graphics, and that's what we can call believable realism. And that's mainly what, you know, a lot of work has been going into, how to make our computer graphic images more believable. And this work, actually, the reason we achieve believable realism by a thing we call scruffy textures. And that's basically taking a pristine environment, which of course most computer graphics are, and adding stuff to it so it looks untidy. Because subconsciously, when you go into a room, you expect it to be untidy, especially if you've got small children, then it definitely is untidy. And even, you know, even if in the university you paint it, you know, nice corridor, and the first horde of students that goes past, you know, it's completely, you know, scratches, etc. So we subconsciously expect this. If it's not there, then we have a reaction to that. And so you need, if you want something to be believably real, you need to include these things like scruffy textures. And actually what we've done some time is trying to classify what, you know, in computer imagery, where are you? So if something's believable, you know, you're going to have something like computer games and artwork. If it's not believable, you're going to have cartoons or non-photorealistic rendering or modern art, which is completely unintelligible. And then you've got things which are not believable but are physics-based. And for example, the avatars, or human characters, is a key problem, which even though they attempt to model the physics because of what's called the uncanny valley, because of the way in which we interact with people every day, we have a real problem interacting with characters. And so they don't look real. And then you've got virtual reality, which sort of sits across the two. You've got photorealism, which certainly is physically based, it's believable. Photographs is physically based, it's believable. And real virtuality, we're hoping to set up here, which is definitely physically based and very much believable. So the key thing we need to define, first of all, is what is realism? And that's a very hard problem. I mean, realism means different things to different people. But really what you want to do is you want to try and define realism in terms of your application. And it's really about, you know, if you want to use your virtual environment as a representation of reality, then your experience in the virtual environment has to be the same as your experience in the virtual environment. So I've got that wrong. The experience in the virtual environment is the same as the real. There has to be a one-to-one mapping between the two. And that's important because as we start using computer representations more and more for training, for simulation, for virtual archaeology, and other things like that, we need to be able to make sure that what we produce is perceptually equivalent to the real world. Otherwise, all you have is a pretty picture, and it may look nice, but it's nothing at all like the real thing. And we did some initial research which showed that if you don't have this one-to-one mapping, then you actually can adopt a different learning strategy in the virtual world than you would in the real world. So when you get to the crunch situation, you have all this training in the virtual world, all this training in simulators, you get to the real world, crunch situation, you have to react. You react according to your training, but because there wasn't this one-to-one mapping, you actually do something which you shouldn't be doing in the real world. And so it is very important. If you want to use the virtual world as a representation of reality, you need to be confident that what you actually do in the virtual world matches in the real world. Otherwise, say, when you come to a crunch situation, you'll end up doing the wrong thing, which is never a good idea. Okay, so this is a photograph again. This is taken in Clarence in the Orange Free State. I guess not many of you would know that. But this was a lovely bed and breakfast. I was staying there, and I tried to take a photograph and capture it to show people back in England what sunshine was, because they hadn't seen it before. And this is a wonderful photograph, like your classic photograph, but it's very different from if you were there. And if you were there, you would have heard, of course, the stream, you would have heard the water, you'd be able to look around, you feel the wind on your face, you'd be able to look around, you of course feel the sunshine. Actually, next to this field there are lots of cows, so there's a very interesting smell of aroma of dung in the background. So your whole perception of if you were there is very different than that photograph. And that's what we want to try and do. We want to capture that impression of being there back to as something to show your friends of what it really was like to be there. Okay, of course, if you're computer scientists, you haven't got friends, but maybe you make early friends. And that's really about it. The human feels the world, senses the world with all our senses. Okay, now there's a big debate whether we have 5 or 7 or 9 senses, but typically we can say that we have 5 senses: sight, sound, smell, feel, and taste. No, not touch, but feel. Touch is simply a subset of feel. And the interesting thing about this is that it's not so much the individual senses that are interesting, but it's the way in which the senses interact with each other, so-called cross-modal effects. And there's a 3 Michelin star restaurant in England called the Fat Duck. And when you go there and you order oysters, they bring you an iPod, and while you're eating the oysters, they play the sound of the sea. Because oysters taste better, if that's possible, with the sound of the sea. And that's a very cross-modal effect. And there's lots of other interesting work going on. For example, there's a guy called Charles Spence at Oxford University. He did an experiment. He took all know what Pringle chips are, right? So he took Pringles chips, and when it's stale, you take you know it's stale when you bite it. It's stale. You can tell it. He took some stale Pringles chips, and as you bit it, he played the sound of crunch, and you were convinced that it was a fresh crisp simply by that sound. Even though your mouth was saying, "Hold on a second, this is a bit soggy." Your ears were saying, "Oh no, it's got to be fresh because it made this crunch sound." And that's really what's interesting. Without all the senses there, your brain doesn't do these cross-modal effects, and yet they're part of who you are. And so by creating virtual environments in which we ignore some of the senses, we actually run a real risk of not achieving the level of realism we need. And of course, the other classic one is the ventriloquism effect. You know that when you watch television, it looks like the people are talking, but actually, in fact, the sounds are coming from some speakers elsewhere. But you're convinced that the sounds are coming from their mouths, and or the puppet or whatever. So let's have a quick look at the senses that we need to take into account. And see where we are in terms of research. So the first one is the most, which all of you, I guess, in graphics are very familiar with, the idea of visuals and lighting. Okay, but the key thing with lighting is that we all know that the times of the day and the different lighting effects completely affect your perception of environment. And it's very critical that we get it right. So this is the work we're doing in Cyprus on the Byzantine church called Kitty. And this is Kitty taken bright and early in the morning, at midday, and at dusk. And the actual perception of that environment is very different from the lighting. And so you need to make sure, if you want to perceive that environment, that you have the lighting right depending on the time of day that you're visiting and so on. And the interior lighting also has a major effect. So this is what we did at Carte Blanche in France. Have you been to Lascaux and any of those cave art sites? Okay, you really do need to get out. If you go there and you go wonderful carvings of rock art, and it's all lit by modern lighting. This cave art is 25,000 BC, which is even older than me. And if you were there, and in 25,000 BC, it wouldn't be lit by modern halogen, it would be lit by candlelight. And your perception of the environment is very different when it's lit by the actual lighting than we see it now. So if we're trying to recreate things for archaeologists to explore the past, we can't just say, well, okay, just lit by modern lighting. We have to put in the correct lighting, and that will give us an opportunity to perceive and understand what the site may have appeared like. The other thing, of course, is lighting. Where the light is in the environment directly affects how you perceive things. So this is the church in Kitty. There's this wonderful mosaic right up in the Alps, when you had a huge problem trying to actually capture it. And But because when you're there, these mosaics were actually placed individually. So when you do, if you tile your bathroom today, you buy a sheet of tiles and you stick it up all in one go. In Byzantine times, they basically put down the mosaics individually, and they did it deliberately because let's see if this works. Your perception of the mosaic is going to be affected by where the light is in the environment at any point in time. And that's what we're exploring. Let's see if this works. Hold your breath. So this is the mosaic. It's unfortunately not 3D, it's unwrapped. But if you imagine this is where your light source is, if you change where the light source is, your perception of the environment and the perception of the mosaic is very different. You can see there's this constellation which suddenly appears. I think this is Mary. I understand my religion correctly. Depending on where the light is. So sometimes you can see it really well, and the rest, other times you simply can't see it at all. And other things are highlighted. And again, because these mosaics are individually placed rather than just bought from your local hardware store, obviously there was a purpose behind it. And if you go to the kitty today, it's all about modern lighting, you don't see this at all. But you can imagine that they were positioning the lighting in certain parts of the day to accentuate certain parts. What I find really interesting about this is that they used a lot of gold and silver tesserae, these little mosaics, but then the faces were not, they were all sort of in sort of colours and diffuse colours. And so it's really interesting that the faces tend to stay the same. It's the background around the faces that changes. And we did some eye tracking work on similar, on medieval painting. And in actual fact, if your halo is glowing with candlelight, your eyes get drawn to the faces, not to the halo. So your whole perception of this environment is affected by where the light is. And this is the close-up of baby Jesus. Depending where the light is determined. Again, these certain tesserae are highlighted at certain times of the day. And the question is that deliberate or not? And the likelihood is very yes, it was deliberate. And that helps you understand. We've got our modern lighting, you don't see any of this. The other key thing which we're doing now a lot of work on is high dynamic range. And this has been a real challenge, and I guess, this is perhaps one of the leading universities in the world in high dynamic range, Norrköping. And it's because the real world has got a lot more lighting, even on a dull English day. And the problem is we try to capture that lighting with any capture device, we can't manage it. So if you imagine you go to a church and you love that there's wonderful stained glass windows and lovely sort of ornate carvings, and you whip out your expensive camera and you try and take a picture of it, either you manage to capture the interior, or you get the stained glass, but you can't get both. And no one's been able to do that before high dynamic imaging, and now of course what you have to do is you have to take different exposure levels, because the problem is that the lighting in the church is far more than any sensor a normal camera can capture. That's all changed as of July last year, thanks to a very wonderful German camera company called Spheron. We worked with them, and we produced the world's first high dynamic range video camera. And now you're actually able to capture 20 f-stops, 20 exposure levels, full HD resolution at 30 frames a second. And this is going to revolutionize the way in which we do viewing. Because now 20 f-stop is the magic number, because this camera can capture what the eye can see. So you imagine you're watching tennis on Wimbledon on television. The camera has a huge problem trying to track that ball, or football match where the ball goes from the dark of the shade of the stadium into the sunshine. The camera crews have a huge trouble trying to track it. Even I tracked it without a problem. Okay, and this camera will be able to do that as well. And it's going to revolutionize the way in which we deal with lighting in the future. We can actually capture now, and we now have the full pipeline. The full HDR pipeline is available. We've got cameras which can capture it. We've got HDR, high dynamic range displays which can show real-world lighting, and application can manipulate it. And the problem is it generates a lot of data, and we need to compress it. And this is some of the work we're doing. We're trying to spin out a company now called Go HDR, and the problem is that a minute of footage of high dynamic range video is 42 gigabytes, compared to 9 gigabytes for standard video. So, that's impossible to then deal with in any manageable way. So you need to compress it, and this is what we work in. We work on some compression algorithms, which effectively take it down to about 150 to 1 without loss in detail, and that means we can actually work with it. So basically, it introduces a whole lot of new problems. When you try and actually capture real-world lighting, and we want to store it, transmit it, and display it, it's actually had to introduce all sorts of other research challenges, the key one of which is compression. Okay, and I work with a wonderful cartoonist who's trying to sort of explain with a cartoon how, this concept, and of course the concept was with this camera now you can actually capture both the springbok and the shade and the sunshine if you're on safari. Next time you're on safari, not that you ever get out much, but you would be able to actually capture them both with the camera. And no other camera's been able to do that today. So this is really revolutionized, and will revolutionize. And when it gets to your standard camcorder, you won't need extra lighting to be able to capture it. If your eye can see it, this camera can capture it. Okay, well, lighting, sound, of course, is an important thing. And this is what we do work with David Howard, who's at the University of York, who does 3D sound modeling. One way to do that is if you have an interior, this is the York Minster, the York Cathedral, and you go in there with two times a year, they clean the whole cathedral and they take out all the chairs. And you go in there and you set yourself up and you try the impulse response function. And you can work out how that sound dissipates from that point in the environment. If you know that, you know your environment, you've got the geometry of the environment, you've got the impulse response function, you can take your favorite soprano, if there's such a thing, and you can stick her in there and close the doors. And you can have her singing at that point in the cathedral, taking into account how our outmouth might reverberate. Okay, that's scary, but anyway. And then you can go to other places. There's a wonderful place called the Hamilton Mausoleum in England, which is really the worst place for acoustics ever invented. So basically you've got a box with a cylinder and a hemisphere on top of it. So it's really the bad place for acoustics. And the key thing, it's got one of the longest, I can't say this word, reverberation, this word, times. That word. It's 15 seconds. And it's there. So if you go in there and you fire impulse response function, there's tremendous reverberation. Yeah, one of these days I'll get it right. And of course now you can go, and the nice thing about it, of course, it's got good solid doors. You can stick the soprano in there. And she doesn't half a wall. Yeah, exactly. Right, the best place to put the soprano and yourself is in fact in the shower. Basically, you always sound good in the shower, and your family might not think so, but in fact the shower has got tremendous acoustics for singing. And that's why everyone seems to sing in the shower. As long as you've got a good solid door between you and the family, you're right. So you can stick the old soprano in there, and she sounds a lot better, if that's possible. But anyway, that's the person. So that's interesting. So with this idea of impulse function and that, you can actually now, and there's a lot of work going on modeling 3D sound. I would say it's not a solved problem, it's pretty close to being a solved problem. And the important thing is, of course, when you listen to your normal MPEG player, the sound's inside your head. The most sounds you hear in the world are outside your head. Unless you hear voices in your head, which is not a good thing anyway. But if you are, so the key thing with 3D sound is to make sure the sound comes from the direction in which you are. And of course you move your head to pick up the direction of it. And sound, the other key one is smell. And smell is really interesting because this is very much a primeval sense. This is one of our very first senses we evolved with. And it's very strong for emotions because it's such a low level evolutionary sense. And you know that the smell of burning, no matter what's happening, if you smell burning, it'll cut through all your other senses and say, there's something burning here. It's used a lot for humans. It dictates all sorts of things. It dictates our mood. It's very good for memory. So you will remember an event if there's a strong smell. So if there's a smell of whatever, lavender at some event, and you smell lavender again, you will get all those memories back. And that works far better than visuals or audio. The other thing is very good for mate choice. So if a young lady or a young gentleman smells very good to you, okay, that's if they haven't washed for a while, then you haven't affected with perfume. But if they smell good to you, it's because they're a very good mate. Because if someone smells good to you, they have a very different immune system to you than yours. And for mating, that's a good idea. For having children, that's a very good idea. So if someone doesn't smell good to you, it's because not that they haven't washed, but because their immune system is very similar to yours. And so your choice of mate is affected by that. The other thing, important thing for especially for the young ladies here or the young gentlemen here, if your young lady asks you to buy her perfume, never do that. Okay, never choose a perfume for your young lady. It'll never work. Okay, because her perfume will smell good to you if she likes it. Because if she likes the perfume, she'll give off natural pheromone because of that feeling of like, and that's what you'll find attractive. So never buy a perfume for her. Let her buy her own perfume, give her the money, tell her to buy a perfume she likes, and you will like it anyway because it fits her. The world's rough out there. You have to be careful. These are important things. And so actually, smell is a key part. So your whole environment, we use smell. Of course, now we dilute our smell with soap and things like that. And the problem is that when you go to school, you learn art and you learn music, but you never learn smell. And George Scott, who's a wonderful, rather eccentric gentleman who works with, who has his own perfume company, says that if you learn smell, and the same as you learn art and music, by the time you get to an adult, you'll have the same smell capability as a dog. It's just that we just don't train our noses. We actually have very, very powerful noses, we just don't train it. And you know that whiskey tasters and wine tasters all have very, very good noses, because they've trained it. And we could have the same. In fact, your nose hangs down into your brain hangs down into the top of your nose. So there's no filter between your nose and your brain. Whereas you've got ears and eyes which are filtering the light and the sound, your nose actually hangs into the top of the brain. So never stick a pencil up your nose, because you're damaging your brain. You're learning lots today. And so what we're trying to do, we're trying to recreate them. We have a project called Mars, which is the mobile aroma recreation system to try and create smells and deliver it. And so what we did, we went to South Africa to see whether we could do this, and we found a rather large gentleman who gave us a wonderful deposit of smell. I mean, a really large deposit. See here, a huge deposit. And we actually then collected the genuine rhino poo in a bag, as one does. And then we have a device that actually captures, and the way you capture smell, you simply suck the air across the sticky tube, and the smell molecules are just molecules, and they stick to the tube, and then you analyze it. And this here, the pink line is genuine rhino poo. And the others are various types of grasses, and not surprisingly, rhino poo has a very strong link with that grasses, because this is what this gentleman eats. And then having got the signature, because now you can transmit this digitally, and then you can use a device such as this, which has got a number of smells built in, and you simply release the smells according to that signature tube. So we actually can, and you can deliver it directly to the nose. And the advantage of that is the big problem with the smell is how do you get rid of it, because when you move around in virtual environments, you want the smell to change. If you deliver smell directly to the nose, it's easy, because as you breathe out, you actually get rid of the smell molecules, and you can introduce some new ones. Taste is really interesting. Taste actually started, research into taste started back in the 1500s, which is a very long time ago. But no one has digital taste at the moment. But the interesting thing about taste is actually 80% smell, or thereabouts. Next time you take a piece of apple, close your nose. If you bite an apple with your nose closed, you will not be able to tell the difference between apple and potato, raw potato. Okay, not a good idea to eat raw potato because it's actually poisonous, but for the interest of science, you should try this. And so, but when you release your nose, you actually can tell it's apple, because all of apple is in the smell, and there's volatile molecules which are released when you bite it. But if you close your nose, you can't tell it's apple. There are only 5 basic tastes: sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami. Umami is Japanese for tasty, and it's basically like monosodium glutamate. It's similar to the taste of tomatoes. And so we've actually got work on. So this is a genuine whiskey tasting kit. So whiskey tasters never put the whiskey in their mouths. It seems such a waste. But they have actually. This is a kit which has got 25 different smells, and if you identify these smells, you can actually identify the whiskey just based on the smells. And the professional kit is 2,500 smells. Okay, we tried this experiment. We were up in Scotland, and so we tried it all, and we did it, and it actually worked very well until we actually decided to taste the whiskey in our mouths, and then it all went horribly wrong. 5 bottles of whiskey and 20 of us, so yes. So that's taste. So again, there's a lot more work needs to be done in taste, but it's certainly doable. And the final one is feel. Feel is a real challenge, because we've actually got 20 different types of feel sensors, and the main problem with feel is that it basically affects the whole body. So the other sight, sound, smell, and taste are already in your head. But feel is your skin is your largest sensory organ, and you feel through your skin. We can feel things like heat, cold, Windows 7, you have to love it. Heat, cold, pain, touch, etc. So touch is one of them. And of course, there's a huge amount of research been going on haptics. Haptics is a big research here, and a lot of work being done, and no one's got very far with haptics. And the problem is, I mean, your best data glove in the world can maybe have 10 sensory devices on your hand, when in actual fact the real hand is has over 100. So it's very difficult to simulate it. But in actual fact, most of your experiences aren't very interactive in that sense. Most of your day-to-day experience, like now, are quite passive. You're sitting in the audience sleeping, and I'm rambling on here, and it's very passive. There's no interaction. The only interaction you've got is the feel of the comfortable chairs on your rear end, and and a few other things. So the actual amount of interaction, and of course there's a temperature which is affecting you. And all of that. So if we there's a large amount we can do without having to worry about haptic devices. Haptic devices will come, and the research is going on. But in actual fact, if we concentrate a lot on passive interaction rather than active interaction, we can achieve a lot. And so maybe you want to shake hands in this meeting, or maybe you go on a game park experience and you just sit in the truck, and yes, there's a bit of motion in that, but you are not interacting with the environment. That's doable. So to actually deal with haptics, we are going to look at that sort of thing. We're going to look with specialized user interfaces. So if you want to have a motion platform for bouncing around on a truck or on a yachting scenario, we've done this. This is the first sort of demonstrator we've done, which is a yachting scenario. Then you need some sort of other devices other than just the basic ones to the head. So real virtuality then, and I must say this is definitely a work in progress. We haven't solved this problem yet, and if we get the funding, we hope we make some more progress. But basically, the key part of real virtuality then must be real time. You can't have an interaction which is not real time, because we live the world in real time. But it also must be high fidelity, and so it has to be based on physics. There are 2 different types of scenarios here. The one is the real world now. So you could recreate this environment now without any computer modeling, simply with capture devices. So you can capture the sound, the smell, the temperature, the whatever, the taste, etc., the taste of the coffee from the coffee break. You can capture all that now. You don't need to model it all, because you can just simply capture it. But if you want to try and capture the past or the future, then you have to worry about some form of computer model. If you want to see what was this place like 100 years ago, well, you can't capture it, or what does it look like 100 years from now, you have to model that. And so you need to have some sort of computer modeling. It has to be perceptually equivalent to the real world. It also needs to be personalized because we're all different. We're all individuals. Have you all seen Life of Brian?
Yeah.
Okay, that's encouraging. Okay, but you know, all individuals. Okay, everyone is different. We all got different way we present these things. Women are better at seeing red than we are, than men are, because women have got two red ability to detect two red sensors in their eyes instead of males have got one, which is why most males, 1 in 4 males are colorblind. And, you know, we're all different in that sense, both gender and individually. And the device we're working on to do that is what we call a virtual cocoon, which will be this sort of head-like device here, which has the audio, the visuals, the temperature provided to the back of the neck. The back of the neck is a very good sensor for heat and temperature and wind. And we're only focusing on the head at the moment. So we need to worry about the rest of the body at some point, but that's future work. And so the idea for the now scenario is very easy. You have your virtual cocoon, and then you have a device which you call a virtual U, which you can mount on the back of a game park truck in South Africa, for example. It can go around the game park, feeding back the sensors back to you in England, and you can experience the game park from the comfort of your home in England. There's such a thing as a comfortable English home. Okay, so how are we going to do this? I mean, this is all very well. It's all very well to sit here, wave my hand and say, this is all wonderful and this is the future, etc., etc., but there are some real challenging problems, and this is why this is all research. And the key thing is, you know, you want to achieve realism in real time. This has been a holy grail of computer graphics and now multi-sensory for many years, and we haven't achieved it yet. And by physically based, we want to do it physically based at about 30 to 60 frames a second. And, well, everyone's saying, well, this is parallel processing GPUs or parallel cluster or something. And anyone who's ever done any work in parallel processing will tell you that parallel processing is wonderful, and as you add more and more processors, eventually you get to a point, you know, 100 processors is going to be running 100 times quicker. Okay, absolutely rubbish. Never ever gets there. What happens is you add in more and more processors, you get to a point, and beyond that point, it actually gets worse. And so by the time you add 100 processors running about as quick as it did on 2 or 3. Because parallel processing introduces all sorts of overheads, communication, etc., and at some point, you know, they'll start to dominate. And so parallel processing can reduce time, but it'll never give us the realism in real time we need by itself. Because the scenes are going to get more and more complex, and your communications will always dominate. So it is a partial solution, but it's not the same solution. And you know, so we have to do something else. And the key insight we had, and I guess it's going back almost 10 years now, was that it's all very well to people focus on doing this computation, etc., but the main thing is we're producing images for people to see, or environments for people to see. Okay? And we all think we're good. We're not that good, actually. But we're dealing with the real world all the time, and how do we cope with that? And you know, if we can understand how we see things and perceive things, we can actually use that to reduce computation without people seeing. Right, so first thing we're going to do a quick eye test. How good are your eyes? Okay, you think they're good, you know, okay, some of you got glasses, some of you got hangovers, but all of you got hangovers, I hope. Your students, I thought. The question is, how good are your eyes? So what I'm going to show you, a quick fly-through of 4 rooms. So very simple graphics. There are going to be 4 rooms. In each room there will be a mug, and there will be some pencils in the mug. Okay, and I want you to give me the cumulative total of all the pencils. So 4 rooms, 4 mugs, 4 lots of pencils. How many are there in total? Okay, but it's not that simple because in the mugs are also going to be paintbrushes. Okay, so even though it's going to be projected up here, it's going to be still quite small. So I want you the pencils, not the paintbrushes. And there'll be a countdown, and then there'll be a black screen with a white mug showing you where to look. Okay, let's see how good your eyes are. I'll get Windows 7 to cooperate with me. Oops, doubt. Okay, let's see how good your eyes are. Count the pencils. How many pencils?
15.
14. 16. Some of you guys need your eyes tested, right? What is the color of the carpet?
Red.
Red? Blue? What other objects are in the room?
Paintings and
Paintings, stuff. Teapots, well, of course, it's going to be teapots and graphics, isn't it? Okay, so all that information was reaching your eyes, okay, but you didn't see it, you didn't perceive it. So watch it again. If you watch it again, you'll see a lot more. Okay, but you're still in this huge amount of information. Carpet's actually blue with the texture, the teapots, of course the teapots. There's books which said Lord of the Rings, it was very topical at the time when we were doing this work. And there's a lot more information which now you take in, but when you're counting the pencils, you simply didn't see that. And that's not because you had too many beers last night, it's actually called inattentional blindness. It's a fact of the human perception system which says that we get bombarded by all this information. We simply can't cope with all the time, so we just build up what we need to do the job we do. What we did in this animation, what we calculated, this is just computer graphics, before we did any multisensory, we knew where you were going to be looking at the pencils. We calculated in very high quality, 10 times the computational cost. Between the green and the red circles, we did medium quality, and from the red circles downwards, we did a very low quality. And just to show you the difference, this is the chair rendered fully anti-aliased, at very high quality, and the same chair rendered without anti-aliasing, and no one saw the difference. The fact is that the chair is at right. There's a chair there, fully, lots of anti-aliasing. When you look at it now, yeah, obviously it's a prop, but at the time, no one saw it. And so why spend all that time computing this when people don't see it? And the same applies to everything. We can't, at any point in time, we can only perceive a very small amount. And especially applies when you've got multi-senses. If you're driving along looking for a street sign, you'll turn your radio down. Because you've got so much cognitive power in your brain, and if you're playing your favorite music, it's taking up a large portion of that. And so you've got to turn the radio down to give more precision to your eyes to allow you to find a street sign. We did some psychophysics which showed that when you count a pencil, no one can tell the difference. And it's all to do with, in this case, your human visual system. And you've got two distinct parts to your human visual system, so-called bottom-up and top-down. When you go into environment, your eyes will automatically be drawn to certain things. And it's evolution, you can't help it. Okay, you'll be driven to movement in the periphery. No matter what, if there's some movement in the periphery, you will see it. Your eyes will be drawn to it. Why? Because when we're evolving, that movement could be the predator, the saber-toothed tiger in the bushes, and if we didn't see it, we wouldn't evolve much further. We're also very good at seeing certain colors. Red and green stands out a lot. When we were evolving on the plains of Africa, we needed to be able to see the fruit was ripe before we committed the effort to go and fetch it. Okay, the movement periphery, if you've been to a bar in America, it's almost impossible to have a conversation with a young lady in a bar in America. Because no matter how much you try and talk to her, all the TV's all around you and you end up watching television. Your eyes get drawn because you move in the periphery and you end up watching some stupid game show instead of talking to the young lady. So don't try impress your girlfriend by going to a bar in America. And that's what we call basically saliency maps. So in any scene that psychologists have studied this a lot, human vision people study this a lot, in any scene we know exactly where the eye is going to be drawn to based on saliency, based on evolution. But there's a second part to the human visual system which is called top-down, which basically says that we can direct your attention depending on the task you're doing. So I asked you to count the pencils, I knew that's where you were going to be looking, and that's where I could focus the computational power, and that's what we call task maps. And this idea of top-down came from a Russian scientist in 1967 called Jarvis. He took this picture of Rieman's unexpected visitor, and he eye-tracked people doing various tasks. If they were free viewing, so that's the eye gaze pattern. If you asked to judge the ages, that was that eye gaze pattern, etc. And okay, this is a painting, but there's a huge amount of detail in here and in the window, which a lot of the time is simply not seen. And if your eyes don't focus on it, you won't see it. And like the carpet color, you didn't focus on it, you just don't see it. Even though the light reaches your eyes, your perception says, I don't know what that is. And so that's what we basically did. We basically combined these now into what we call importance maps, which says that in any scene, only certain parts have to be rendered in high quality, and the rest can be rendered in much lower quality, and the human will not know the difference. Simply cannot. And we've done lots of proofs of it using psychophysics. So, for example, if you are to walk through a building and you're the fire safety officer and you're looking at fire safety objects, as you go through your walkthrough, we know where the fire safety objects are. We render those in high quality. What's going to attract your attention? Edges. Not surprisingly, fire safety objects attract your attention. That's probably a good idea. And you end up with a map, which we call importance map, where the areas in white say these are very high quality, very important. Your eyes will see those. Areas in black are less important. And of course, it's physically based, so we use ray tracing to do this, and we can render these in 16 rays per pixel, and so fully anti-alias, and others maybe 1 ray per 4 pixels, and you can get an image like that, which this is at 1/6 of the time, the same, and people cannot tell the difference. Now, if you sit and stare at that image for long enough, you will eventually see some difference. You can see that the shadows maybe aren't quite as good, or there's some little artifacts creep in. But while you're doing a walkthrough of a virtual environment, you simply don't see it. So you can actually save, in this case, 6 times, sometimes more, computational power just by rendering only what people perceive. So where are we? I would say that multisensory high-fidelity visualization, physics-based graphics in real time was one of the challenges, and 3D audio and smell. I would say we're pretty close to achieving that. Certainly we have physically based global illumination running at 16 to 20 frames a second on sort of fairly standard hardware with good GPU acceleration, and others around the world are doing the same. 3D audio is again well understood. 3D smell, because you smell, you have to have such precision. Your eyes are very good. You can tell caustic, you can tell BRDF to some extent. Smell, you can smell something, that's about it. So the real challenge is still to be done, so where we're putting a lot of our effort now is feel and taste, and also, of course, the delivery system. How do we deliver these in such a way that we get the real world, real-time modalities? For me, the real exciting part of this, and I think this is, I guess what Norrköping does as well, is we don't work with computer scientists only. I think that's a key thing for any research. Modern research now is not about a single discipline. We get very siloed in our disciplines. But the key thing about it, we have to work with lots and lots of people. We have to work with obviously, visualization, manufacturing people, psychologists, how they work, philosophers, what does realism mean? You have to understand all those questions, physicists, chemists, neuroscientists, etc. And we try to achieve the level of realism that actually immerses the viewer. So we get that level of realism, which is a one-to-one match of the perceptual equivalent. When I was standing in that bed and breakfast in Clarence and Orange Free State, I was watching that stream, I had a certain perceptual experience. I want to have the same experience in the virtual environment. How do we put this all together? Well, the key thing when you try and combine all this, you have to take other things into account. Perhaps the strongest factor in our favor is the human imagination. How many of you play Dungeons and Dragons? Okay, some of you are older than others, right? now computer games completely dominate, but actually you should throw your computer games away. If you want to play a decent Dungeons adventure, you should play Dungeons and Dragons. All played in your mind, there's no computer screen distracting you, and basically your imagination is filling in the details. So the Dungeon Master will say you're walking along a corridor, it's stone walls, you hear the sound of dripping, in the background you hear footsteps approaching, and your brain's building up this whole image for you. You don't need a computer graphics for that. It's all at the end of the day, it all happens up here anyway. And there's another very good example, was a project called Virtual Vietnam, which was to help Vietnam veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder, and had a pretty low-quality virtual environment. But when they showed it to these veterans, the veterans got really engaged in it. At the end of it, they were telling their experiences which weren't in the actual virtual environment. And it's because these veterans had been in Vietnam, they were there, they understood exactly what it was like, and with the right cues, it triggered the imagination to fill in the gaps. So you really have to understand how we can do that. We get the right cues. We don't have to compute a lot because the brain will do it for us. The other thing we need to take into account is how familiar are you with the environment. Why does it feel quicker to drive back home than it does to drive to a place? Because when you drive home, you've done the journey many times before, your brain is not taking so much of it in because it's, oh, I know the way, and so it actually feels quicker because your brain's actually not processing it as much. So we need to take into account. We also need to take into account what you're doing, how the top-down process. And that's, of course, if you imagine you're walking down a street, your perception of that street is very different if you're looking for a street sign. If you're trying to find a coffee shop, then of course you're going to use your nose a lot more. Or if you're an American patrolling in Afghanistan or Iraq, then you've got a few more things you're going to be looking at. So your whole perception depends on what you're doing. And so we put it all together, what we call the perception equation, which says that your perception of any moment in time is based on the task that you're doing and who you are. Very important. And then it's simply a weighted average of the different senses. So your visuals, your audio, your sense, your taste, and your feel. But also there's a distraction factor, which says that, I'm so bored of this lecture anyway, I'm not paying attention, I'm texting someone or something. So there is often the case that, your whole perception environment is affected by, that you're somewhere else. You're thinking about, going home and having a beer or something. You're all on home. And so, once you've got all that, the key thing for us then is to make sure we compute these virtual environments. We don't have to be completely physically accurate, so the human can't deal with it. All we have to be is above threshold for each of these weightings, so that it's perceptually equivalent to the experience you're currently having. So right now, your perception is dominated by sound, so you need to be really accurate with the audio. There's some visuals, because you're watching my slides. There's a bit of smell, because of the person next to you hasn't had a shower. Maybe the taste from lunch, and a bit of the feel because of the temperature. So as long as we understand it, we can do it. And here's an example. I seem to work with a lot of yachts people. I really don't like this, but people I seem to work with to be fanatical yachtsmen. A few of my brothers are around the world skipper. He's taken in the middle of the Pacific. It's not my idea of a good time, but anyway. But if you're trying to create a yachting scenario, this is the first scenario we did, which I'm surrounded by all these damn yachts people, you have to take into account who you are. So if you're trying to create a yachting scenario for an expert yachtsman or yacht lady, you need to take into account the sound of the water and the hull. Apparently, and I'm very much in favour of dry land, if you're on a yacht and you know what you're doing, you listen to the water across the hull to tell you how fast you go. So when you're computing this real virtuality environment for a yachtsperson or expert, you need to really make sure you put a lot of effort in that. But because they're using the ears a lot to monitor that sound, the visuals can be much less precision because they're not paying attention to the visuals. If you're computing the yachting scenario for Joe Public who's just out in the yacht, who cares? It's like water on boat on water. I mean, they're not be very precise. You're not monitoring the sound. And the same with the feel of the wind on the skin. Very important to judge where the wind's coming from. Expert, it has to be accurate and properly directional, but for the public, maybe they don't care, it's like the wind. But maybe they're paying attention to the barbecue on the beach, so you need to worry about smell for that. So these are, when you do this, you need to get the weightings correct, and then you can get away with it. Just very quickly, some examples of where we want to use this for. I said a lot of this work started because we do work in virtual archaeology, trying to recreate the past. And the problem with that is the archaeologists want to understand what the past looked like, and felt like, and smelt like, etc. Because they're trying to understand and do hypothesis testing. A lot of the sites don't exist, or maybe they're not in the same format, and they need to be able to understand it. This is the Temple of Kalabsha in Egypt, near Aswan. You know what been there? Very good. One person. And this is one of the temples that was moved in 1963 when they realized that Lake Nasser was going to sort of fill it up and sort of sink it basically. It always amazing that they waited until it was sort of half full of water and we have a problem here, we need to do something about it. Anyway, so they basically built a dam around it, they took it out brick by brick, they stored it for 7 years and they reconstructed it. It's very close to where the similar location, but it's different location, different orientation. And that's a problem because the sunshine was very important to the Egyptians. This is actually a very interesting temple because it was the last one built, Egyptian religious temple built. It was built in 30 BC during the Roman occupation, so it's really interesting. So the archaeologists want to explore what it's like. So these are just visuals, of course. We would need to be multi-sensory, but you can see what, try and recreate what it might have looked like in the past. The key thing, of course, when you do virtual archaeology is really interesting because it introduces all sorts of other challenges, and the key one, of course, is that this is Egypt. There's nothing there without dust, and so your perception environment is not, which is what, this is your visual out there. You have to take into account dust. And then you find some really interesting papers. There's a wonderful paper by a Norwegian on Egyptian dust. And there's 100 different particles and these orientations, these shapes. A fantastic article. I mean, it's kind of really have to get out of that more. But it's wonderful. You can take that information, all very, very detailed physics, and you can put it in. And this is genuine. This is light being passing through genuine Egyptian dust. Not, normal standard is Arizona road dust. It's a normal standard people use in participating media. This is genuine Egyptian dust, and you can see the difference immediately. Right. Other examples. Building comfort levels. This is something we're doing with a building company called Arab, who want to know when they design buildings, of course, or when they refurbish buildings, you need to take into account. And a lot of it is multi-sensory. Obviously, what you see, the audio, the smell of the building. Certainly, with hospitals, the smell of cooking in the kitchen has a major influence on patient recovery, and of course, temperature and airflow. And they want to be able to do this interactively. They want to be able to show you, well, if we painted this color, what's the affection? If we put the kitchen here, this time of day, what's the smell going to be like, etc. And so I mentioned tourism. This is the one we're trying to get funded at the moment, where you actually can visit a location remotely from the comfort of your home. You can have this whole tourist experience in South Africa. We mount the sensors on the truck that drives around, and it basically transmits back, and you can experience the game park in real time from the comfort of your home. And of course, that's very important because it reduces air travel, which is bad for the planet, and it's also extremely expensive. And some people simply can't travel, and so but they still want to experience the game park. And of course, the game park wants to make some money out of it as well, and the tourists aren't coming, and how they're going to maintain the fences, how they're going to maintain the animals. But of course, when you have this game park experience, it's all via the internet, but there's a business model because you actually pay for that experience. And even though you're not going to South Africa, you're still having the ability to fund it while you're having this experience. You're paying some money for the game park. Of course, the key one is virtual shopping. One of the biggest problems with virtual shops, and certainly during the .com boom, was because people would look at it, see a picture on the internet and buy something and then send it back because it didn't match their expectations. Even simply as the color of a dress looked fine on the picture, but when you got it in your lighting conditions, it really looked awful. And so you need a multi-sensory, so you can feel the cloth, you can try on the shoes, you can smell the cheese, you can taste the whiskey. Your decision to buy will be far more informed. And again, you can do that with confidence in your home, you can social inclusion and reduce unnecessary travel. And hopefully that will minimize return products for that. But again, these things need to be perceptually equivalent, that you choose the cheese that you want, and the same as in the shop and you choose the cheese in the same conditions. Because if not, then it's, again, you get having pretty pictures that's meaningless. It's got to be perceptually equivalent. Face-to-face meeting is another key one. A lot of time and effort is spent flying from New York to London for a meeting, for a 1 hour meeting to discuss something. And face-to-face meeting is something about a face-to-face meeting which is far more compelling than video conferencing or anything like that. What is it about a face-to-face meeting which allows people to develop trust, to exchange information in a very intense manner? We believe a lot of it's about the other senses that video conferencing simply don't deliver. Smell, taste, temperature, etc. And if we could deliver all those in a perceptually equivalent manner, then you'd be able to have a face-to-face meeting. My parents in South Africa, my sisters in New Zealand, I can actually have a conversation, sort of a very close, cozy conversation and interaction with them, even though we're not physically there. We need to be able to trust the environment. So if you're meeting with someone virtually face-to-face, you need to make sure it is the right person and this thing. But it does actually allow a lot of, if we get it right, it'll allow a lot more human interaction across the world. And I think that's a big challenge we face. That as travel becomes more and more difficult, we're going to travel less, and basically the big danger of that is xenophobia. Yeah, I come from South Africa. I know that people, if you don't know people, you don't trust them. Or the French, or don't like those people. That's not normal anyway. But any French people here? But that's the problem. I think one of the big reasons why Europe is a safer place-ish is because we've been able to travel a lot. And on cheap airlines, you go all around Europe, you go to Poland and France, and there you meet the people, and you realize that the vast majority are just like you. They speak a different language, have some funny habits, but they're mainly just like you. But if you can't travel, then people can exploit and say your fear of the unknown. And I think it's going to be a real problem when we can't travel to China, we can't travel to Africa or wherever. We get xenophobia is very easy to manipulate. I mean, if we can get this right, you can go to Hong Kong and experience Hong Kong without leaving England or Sweden. But it's the whole experience of it, and you can interact with people as if you were there. So, really it's all about multi-sensory virtual environments, as if you were there, and that's what real virtuality is. And I said, we're in some way from it, but that's what we hope to achieve. And this is, again, another wonderful cartoon that Lance does. He's really good at this. But that's really what we want to achieve. You can have the same perceptual equivalent if you're there, and if we get that right, I think it's going to revolutionize the way in which we deal with computers. We now can start to use computers really as a representation of reality, and it opens up things for simulation, for travel, and all these things, which at the moment we do and we use computers for, but there's this big danger. We're not quite right. We're missing out some senses, and so the whole strategy we adopt in the virtual environment may be different from the real environment, and that's potentially very dangerous. Good. Thank you very much.